Hi, I'm Heidi Lobbs, Leadership and Coaching Technical Assistance Coordinator at the Wisconsin RTI Center. I'm here today to share some information with you about how to engage your internal stakeholders for strong and sustained implementation of PBIS, your Equitable Multi-Level System of Support for Behavior, as well as for the potential implementation of an equitable multi-level system of support for academics or for any innovation in your district or school. Session outcomes are tied directly to our center assessments. As you work on the tiered fidelity inventory, items 1.1, 1.7, 1.10, and 1.11, the information in this session will support your work by helping you to identify your internal stakeholders, consider how to use your leadership teams to engage and communicate with your internal stakeholders, and become aware of some strategies to systemically and systematically engage internal stakeholders. This is the graphic that represents an equitable multi-level system of support, whether for PBIS or academics. While you'll hear me mention multiple key system features throughout this session, the system features which figure most prominently in engaging internal stakeholders are strong shared leadership to provide the context necessary for schools and districts to grow and sustain PBIS implementation, systemic implementation throughout the district, schools, teams, and classrooms to promote consistency and effectiveness across the equitable multi-level system of supports, and collaboration among staff, learners, families, and communities to make the complex work of systems change possible. Let's begin by identifying who your internal stakeholders are. For purposes of our conversation today, we'll include your school board, district level leaders, including the superintendent, principals, teachers, support staff, students, and parents as your internal stakeholders. The school board and district level leaders are in this group because we know now that the strongest and most sustainable systems are implemented district-wide, with leadership and guidance at the district level to ensure systemic and systematic implementation. As we move through this session, we'll consider the varied needs of these stakeholders for engagement in your equitable multi-level system of support and how you can consciously plan to communicate with and engage them. As you look at this graphic from the National Implementation Research Network, showing the many elements necessary for the successful and sustainable implementation of an innovation within a system, you see immediately that leadership teams are central to this work. Leadership teams at all levels play a key role in engaging your internal stakeholders. This graphic illustrates how leadership teams are linked and aligned for systemic and systematic implementation of your equitable multi-level system of support. Let's take a closer look at the makeup and work of these leadership teams. First, the membership of these teams is diverse. At the district level, the team would include central office leaders, potentially including the superintendent, and principals from across the district, as we know that administrators play a key role in the systemic and systematic implementation of an equitable multi-level system of support. It would also include leaders and coaches from student services, special education and regular education, and diverse areas of the curriculum, as well as parents. A school leadership team's membership is diverse as well. It includes the school's PBIS or RTI coordinator or coach, a school administrator, teachers from special and regular ed, various content areas and grade levels, student services, support staff, parents, and for high schools, student representation. Grade level or content area leadership teams include representatives from their departments and/or grade levels, or potentially all teachers from a particular grade level or department at each school. Ideally, every school in the district is represented on the district leadership team, and every grade level and/or content area is represented on every school team. This results in systematic implementation of the equitable multi-level system of supports across the district, in every school, every grade level and content area, and ultimately in every classroom. And it results in consistent communication and engagement with internal stakeholders across the district and the school. It's important to note the vertical alignment here. This means that there is alignment and coherence between the leadership teams at all levels. The district leadership team determines the overall direction and design of an innovation like PBIS. The leadership team in each school in the district aligns with the direction set by the district. Grade level and content area leadership teams align with the district and school direction. Ultimately, PBIS in every classroom reflects the direction set by the district, school, and content or grade level teams. These leadership teams all play a central role in engaging and communicating with internal stakeholders for the strong and sustainable implementation of an equitable multi-level system of support like PBIS. They create paths to engage stakeholders in deliberate and conscious ways, ensuring the implementation of PBIS with fidelity, in essence, making it happen. The National Implementation Research Network provides us with a clear picture of what it takes to successfully implement an innovation like PBIS. We know that it takes time, typically 3 to 5 years, to fully implement something like PBIS with fidelity. We've already established that it takes teams, leadership teams, to guide districts and schools through the stages of implementation. The leadership teams provide the necessary supports, resources, professional development and training, and content. They are also responsible for communication with stakeholders about the innovation throughout its implementation. That's the engaging stakeholders piece. Engaging stakeholders means getting buy-in and clarity around the innovation in order to create shared commitment to it at all levels. That shared commitment means that the internal stakeholders all align around common objectives that will move the innovation forward. That's how to make it happen. Without leadership teams, the implementation of an equitable multi-level system of support like PBIS is unlikely to occur in a systemic and systematic way. SISIP, which stands for State Implementation and Scaling Up of Evidence-Based Practice, calls this letting it happen. Without direction and support for PBIS from leadership teams, there's little consistency, little stakeholder engagement, and little sustainability. The lack of shared commitment can be directly linked to a lack of stakeholder engagement. At best, it results in haphazard implementation. At worst, PBIS never really gets off the ground. In situations where there are pockets of interest, leadership, and stakeholder engagement, it's possible to help an innovation like PBIS to be implemented rather than just letting it happen. The result, however, is pockets of implementation rather than strong implementation throughout the entire system. The process tends to take longer than it would if there are strong leadership teams district-wide in all schools to guide the implementation of PBIS in a systematic way. When there are strong leadership teams at all levels, district, school, and content or grade level teams, it's possible to make PBIS happen. Those teams are accountable for change and progress in implementation, provide the necessary supports for PBIS, and deliberately and regularly engage and communicate with stakeholders to establish a shared commitment to implementing PBIS with fidelity. Those actions on the part of the leadership teams yield powerful results. As you can see in this graphic from SISIP, the absence of a leadership team, supports, and deliberate stakeholder engagement leads to an implementation rate of 14% over 17 years. With an implementation team, supports, and deliberate and regular stakeholder engagement and communication, implementation skyrockets to 80% over 3 years. Which would you choose for your PBIS implementation? In summary, leadership teams provide an accountable and sustainable structure and deliberately and regularly engage and communicate with stakeholders to move a practice like PBIS through the stages of implementation with fidelity. Now that we've established that leadership teams are critical to the successful implementation of an equitable multi-level system of support like PBIS, and that they are responsible for engaging and communicating with stakeholders, let's turn our attention to what we communicate to stakeholders and how we engage them. Let's begin by looking at what are key areas of leadership teams' focus during the implementation of an innovation like PBIS. Looking horizontally, we can see that the leadership teams determine the vision, non-negotiables, and goals and action plans around the implementation of an equitable multi-level system of supports. Vision refers to the preferred future that will exist as a result of the implementation of the innovation. How will outcomes change? How will outcomes be more equitable? Think big here. What will it look like when you get there? What's the ultimate big picture goal? Non-negotiables refer to the evidence-based practices that all staff are expected to use. What practices will all staff implement at Tier 1? These can be classroom management practices, instructional practices, or collaborative practices. What professional learning opportunities will all staff have? How will coaches support staff in implementing these practices? Goals and action plans refer to the data-driven continuous improvement plans and cycles that will enable the leadership teams to monitor their progress. Notice also that just like the leadership teams themselves, the visions, non-negotiables, and goals and action plans are vertically aligned and linked. The district vision drives and guides school visions. District and school visions drive and guide team visions. All three drive the vision of each individual classroom. Similarly, district non-negotiables are operational and implemented at the school level. Teams follow the lead of the district and school non-negotiables. Non-negotiables are ultimately operational throughout the district, schools, and teams down to individual classrooms. Goals and action plans are created first at the district level. Schools follow suit and align their goals and action plans with those of the district. Team goals and action plans align with and support the goals and action plans of the school and district. Ultimately, work at the classroom level aligns with and contributes to achieving the district, school, and team goals and action plans. So as leadership teams begin to plan their efforts to communicate with and engage stakeholders, they need to consider what key points need to be shared regarding the vision, non-negotiables, goals, and action plans at each level. As district leadership teams begin to plan their efforts to engage and communicate with stakeholders, it's also important to be mindful of what Doug Reeves calls initiative overload. Research has shown us that most schools and districts undertake more initiatives than they are able to successfully attend to at any given time. Too many initiatives and innovations can lead to fatigue, anger, and resistance. Consequently, teams are wise to consider how they might align an innovation with elements of their system that are already in place. How do they help stakeholders to make connections between the existing vision, non-negotiables, and goals and action plans? How is this an evolution rather than a total change of direction? Stakeholder engagement looks different at different stages of implementation of an innovation. At the initial stage, exploration or purpose building, the primary purpose of stakeholder engagement is to create awareness of the need for the innovation. People must be convinced that there is a powerful reason to implement a different way of doing things. Often, leadership teams focus on selling the change without first convincing stakeholders that there is a need for the change. At this point, the leadership team needs to focus on what is the problem to be solved, what data can we share that illustrates this need, and how will we share this need with our stakeholders? In other words, how can we sell the problem? Sell the problem before selling the solution. Research on change implementation shows that it's important to have at least 80% of stakeholders on board before moving forward with an innovation. In order to reach that threshold, it's likely that multiple efforts to engage stakeholders in multiple formats will be required throughout the stages of implementation, but especially during exploration or purpose building. As implementation progresses to the installation change, stakeholder engagement expands. While not losing sight of the importance of highlighting the need for the innovation, leadership teams begin to communicate with stakeholders around changes in infrastructure that will occur and new resources that become available. This is an important stage for initial training and professional learning about the innovation. It's also important at this stage for leadership teams to establish feedback loops to learn what stakeholders are thinking and feeling about the innovation. In addition, initial data from student outcomes and fidelity assessments can be shared. In initial implementation, leadership teams provide regular database progress updates on the use of the new practices. Initial attempts at implementation are likely to be less than perfect, so coaching support is important. At this stage, leadership teams should recognize and celebrate success, even small ones, as stakeholders' capacity to implement practices with fidelity increases. Data reflecting student outcomes, as well as the use of the new practice by staff, may be used at this stage. Much of the stakeholder engagement revolves around the question, how's it going? At full implementation, stakeholder engagement increases its focus on sharing data from improvement cycles that show increasingly positive student outcomes and also respond to needs to modify practices and procedures for more effective use of the new practice. As full implementation is achieved, there may be a tendency to relax efforts to engage stakeholders, thinking that the job is done and it's time to move on to something else. On the contrary, it's important to regularly and intentionally engage stakeholders at this point. Failure to do so may lead to a relaxation of expectations regarding the new practice and a slow slide backwards. Now let's add the who, how, and how often to the stakeholder engagement picture. Members of the stakeholder group are diverse, and engaging them requires leadership teams to vary their efforts in response to stakeholders' diverse needs. Teams should consider who needs to know what about the innovation, when, and how frequently, and what specific engagement strategies are most appropriate for each stakeholder group at a particular point in time. Initially, stakeholder engagement will most likely be more frequent than at full implementation. School board members will likely need different information than staff who are actually implementing the new practices. Support staff needs for engagement will likely differ from those of district leaders. What's important is that leadership teams carefully consider all of these stakeholder groups as they plan engagement efforts and ensure that all groups are engaged in meaningful ways. There's a wide range of strategies for stakeholder engagement to consider. These include formal presentations at school board meetings, administrative meetings, faculty meetings, team meetings, and PTO meetings, an annual report released to the school board, district staff, and parents, professional development opportunities offered to staff, district, school, team, and classroom newsletters, minutes from leadership team meetings shared regularly with staff, email blasts from district leaders, principals, and teams, personal one-on-one conversations, And of course, celebrations, including recognition assemblies. Many schools that are implementing PBIS, for example, hold regular assemblies with students and teachers to celebrate success and create enthusiasm for PBIS. Share these celebrations with other stakeholders as well. Invite district leaders, support staff, including custodians, food service workers, and bus drivers, and also parents to attend and join the celebration. It's also important for leadership teams to deliberately consider the frequency of stakeholder engagement with various stakeholder groups. Some will benefit from more frequent opportunities for engagement than others. Who needs weekly engagement? Who needs monthly engagement or quarterly engagement? At what point in the implementation of the innovation is biannual or annual engagement sufficient? A key piece of advice here is, when in doubt, engage and communicate with stakeholders more frequently rather than less frequently. In the previous slide, we looked at strategies for stakeholder engagement that involve giving information to stakeholders, telling them about the innovation. It's important to also plan stakeholder engagement in which we listen to stakeholders and gather their input. Listening and gathering input sends the message that stakeholders and their opinions are valued. It also allows us to anticipate obstacles and resistance and actively plan to address them. Strategies for gathering stakeholder input and opinions include the use of focus groups, listening sessions, and surveys. In planning stakeholder engagement, make sure that communication is designed to be two-way. Here are some additional considerations for leadership teams as they consider how to engage and communicate with stakeholders. The first and perhaps most important is to make stakeholder engagement deliberate and planned. Don't just let it happen. Don't just help it happen. Make it happen. Second, make stakeholder engagement ongoing over time. Stakeholders will likely require time and multiple opportunities to thoroughly understand the issues and commitment to the innovation. Once is not enough. Next, to ensure that engagement is deliberate, planned, and ongoing, make it a regular item on the leadership team agenda. At every meeting, check to make sure that every stakeholder group has regular communication with the leadership team and ongoing engagement. And finally, write it down. Make a written plan for stakeholder engagement, explicitly identifying strategies, timelines, and persons responsible for carrying out the plan. As your leadership team plans internal stakeholder engagement, it's important to consider how to involve and support those who are new to your school or district. What initial training needs do they have? What kind of coaching and support will follow the initial training to ensure implementation with fidelity? You may also want to consider including newer staff members on the leadership team to bring a fresh perspective to the team's work. Too often, once an innovation like PBIS is fairly well implemented, efforts to engage new stakeholders falls off. When that happens, implementation almost certainly falls off as well. Stakeholder engagement never ends. It's important for leadership teams to continue efforts to re-energize the entire staff. Even when an innovation is at full implementation, reach out with communication about how both new and existing resources and support can help. Plan refresher training on a regular basis as part of ongoing implementation. Create and carry out a process for continuous communication with stakeholders to increase commitment and buy-in. And don't forget to celebrate your success with all your internal stakeholders. Thank you for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you in person very soon.